Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good to see some people joining us on this very sunny Thursday afternoon. Um, it's good to have you here. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to wait for a few more people to check in. I don't know where you are in the world. Maybe you want to pop in the chat where you are, how hot it is. I'm down in Cornwall, not because I'm on holiday, because this is where I live, and it's beautiful and warm for Cornwall, which is very mixed weather-wise. So thank you for being here and not being out in the sun having a picnic, which would be an alternative, I guess. I'm delighted that we have Shoshanna with us today from the Fairy Job Mother. You will know because you signed up to it that we're here to talk about gamification strategies, transforming training. A couple of just little tips. If you have a question for Shoshanna as you go through, pop it into the Q&A bit, not the chat, but the Q&A bit as you think of it, and we'll come to those at the end. I'll pop back on screen and field those for you. And don't forget the chat functions there as well. You can say hi to your colleagues. I'm sure Shoshanna's going to ask you a few questions as she goes through, and you might want to use the chat for that too. So without any further ado, Shoshanna, over to you. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Yeah, on this very hot Thursday, I was slightly worried that no one was going to show up because I don't know about you, but I am absolutely sweating every inch of my body off. I'm currently in the loft room in my house, and obviously, I'm guessing for those of you that know, heat rises, but this is the best place for me to do this webinar. So I'm sweating. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me. This is my kind of second time doing this. I was supposed to be presenting this actual session at the ISE development conference a few months ago. I was unfortunately really ill on that day, so had to pull out. So really grateful to have this kind of second chance opportunity to be presenting this to the ISE network. So, before we get going, I just wanted to give a little bit of a quick introduction to myself for those of you who may not know who I am and may not know what I do. Obviously, my name is Shoshanna and I run a company called Fairy Job Mother, which is essentially on a mission to empower those starting out their careers with the skills and confidence they need for impactful careers, whilst also giving managers the understanding and tools to engage and inspire the next generation of leaders. And I guess just a little bit of background in terms of why I do what I do or how I started doing what I'm doing. Um, without going into too much and boring you, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I was someone that struggled academically, so I wasn't super academic at school. I ended up failing all of my exams and pretty much getting kicked out of school. And I really actually struggled to find my first job. When I landed that first job, I really struggled to adjust to it. And I actually ended up getting, it's not very good, but I actually ended up getting fired a few months later. Much to my surprise, I had a manager who I kind of was introduced to, and then I was pretty much just left to go on with things on my own. And I thought I was doing a great job. However, I wasn't, and I ended up finding out I was going to be let go. However, I was lucky enough to land another job shortly after and had the kind of right skills and support to do that and was able to progress quite quickly within that organization. And eventually, within a few years, I was actually the person looking after early careers and managing early career talent. And one of the things I noticed was that, not much had actually changed from my prior experience a few years ago. And there was still a lot of kind of disconnect and, misunderstanding between maybe the young people coming in and knowing what skills employers needed and what they were looking for, but also a little bit of a disconnect still on the employer side in terms of knowing how to effectively keep young people engaged. So it's literally been my mission over the past 2 years to change this and help as many young people as I can so that no one, goes through some of those struggles that I went through. So that's just a little bit about me. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about gamification, essentially. I spent the past 2 years working with various different organizations to help them train young people. And I've been on quite an evolution. So today I'm going to be sharing sharing you through some frameworks that I've developed and that are going to help you increase engagement into your existing programs. So that is enough about me. I would love to learn a little bit about who we actually have here today. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm going to give you a minute or so to maybe just drop your name and what you do in the chat. And Sarah, oh, okay, cool. We got Laura Cook, we've got Early Careers Leader AQA, nice. We have Emma from NFU, we have Charlotte, hello Charlotte. We have Lorna, good to see you. We've got Mark. Okay, perfect. So we've got a good range of people, nice. Oh, we've got a few more coming through. Who else have we got? We got Claire's. Oh, hello, Claire. We've got Rich and we have Anna. Okay, amazing. So we've got quite a bunch of people here. Cool. So now we kind of know who we have and we are to grips with each other. I guess moving on to the first section of the presentation. So I guess a lot of the organisations I work with and through a lot of the work I'm doing, and I wouldn't say this is the same for everyone, but at least with the organisations I'm working with and speaking to, a lot of them aren't actually struggling to attract early talent. They're actually struggling to keep them engaged and confident. And a lot of the time, we invest all this time and money to attract young people, but actually, if the first kind of 90 days aren't structured right, we are actually losing them before we even get any of that return on investment. And typically, when we bring them in, this isn't the same for everyone, but typically, when we do bring them in, onboarding typically looks like something which is 2 to 3 weeks long. It's very much a kind of information overload. And a lot of the time, we do see grads and apprentices kind of dropping off early from that, or at least disengaging. And that's not because they lack talent and it's not because they're lazy. It's usually because they feel overwhelmed and unsupported. And I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with these figures here that I have on the screen. But I guess these are just some figures to kind of emphasize what I'm saying. I'm sure none of you are unfamiliar with the kind of apprentice dropout rates. Although this figure is better than it has been in previous years, it is still quite a large figure. Also, some recently interesting data from Prospects Early Careers report that 43% of graduates are actually currently planning to leave their current employer early. And then just an overall stat that actually 1 in 3 new employees do leave within the first 90 days. So that is just to emphasize how make or break or important it is to actually get this right. Question for all of you in the chat before we move on. What would you say is your kind of biggest challenge that you see when it comes to onboarding early talent? I'll give you a minute or so to pop in the chat and have a think about that. Sarah, I've just seen, I think it was Emma, said that she can't see all of my screen. Hers is cutting off. Would you be able to tell me what you can see, or is that the same for everyone?
Yes, for some
Emma?
reason we're only getting the top half of the slide. Yes, which is it's not that helpful, but I'm guessing it's probably not something you can do too much about right now. I know you're presenting from Canva and
Oh,
yep,
how about
wait.
this?
Oh, there we go. That looks better.
Okay, thanks for raising that, Emma. I'm glad that I did
Yes,
that. Perfect. Is that better?
I think so. Yes, the thing we can see at the bottom, the last bit, it says, "What's the biggest challenge you see with onboarding early talent?" If that's the
Yeah.
bottom of your screen, that's what we can see too.
Okay, perfect. Brilliant. So, now I've basically lost what I was doing, so that's not great. Oh God, there's always IT issues with these things, isn't there? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to check the chat. Okay, so we've got a few things coming through. Tracy said, ours is like you said, too full of information, too bland. Claire said, not overwhelming them. And then Paul said how to keep them all engaged when they all learn differently. Yeah, absolutely. So those are definitely some really kind of valid and common themes that we're typically seeing within different organizations, not just yourselves. So I guess the point I want to make here is, engagement has evolved And the young people that we have coming into our organizations, it's not because they aren't unmotivated. They are simply, in certain ways, just a little bit more selective about who and what they pay attention to, especially in such a crowded digital world. I don't know if anyone has heard of this stat, but I was doing some reading in preparation for this session. And apparently, the average person is estimated to see somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 ads per day, which is crazy, right? So I was just thinking about that from my perspective. Typically, I wake up, I go on my phone, I'll be scrolling social media, which of course I'll be seeing ads and I'll be seeing information, different types of companies trying to catch my attention. Say I leave my house, I go out for a walk, you're walking past bus stops, there are ads, you're walking, it's just crazy. And I just found that stat so, so crazy. So it's kind of no surprise that not only the young people, but also we now as humans have kind of really evolved to essentially be a lot more selective about what we're seeing. So, I guess I want to walk you through this three C's framework, which I've essentially developed, which kind of basically walks through the early talent we have coming in today. They're not looking for a lot of the time we can really overthink this and we think we need to do things that are super amazing and super expensive and super advanced. I would say that's not the case. I've developed a kind of three-step, three C's framework, which I think is really important to think about when we are thinking about engagement, onboarding, and development. So the first one is clarity. So Gen Z young people, they don't like ambiguity, especially when it comes to their careers. They really want to know what's expected of them, how success is defined, and how they're being measured, and also what's next, right? Career-wise, even if that is loosely defined. So when we are building out onboarding experiences and when we are building out development experiences, we really need to keep that clarity piece in mind, especially when they join. Four things they really need to be super clear on are what's expected of them, how success is defined, how they're being measured, and what's next. Without that clarity, they do tend to get a little bit anxious. And then, of course, when they're anxious, they may tend to, disengage or overthink things. The second one is connection. So young people or Gen Z as a whole, they deeply value belonging and not just at a social level, but emotionally and culturally. And I think a lot of the time we can actually forget about this, but they do really want that connection, not only with other people in the cohort, but they desperately want that connection with their manager. They want that sense of team or community, and they want that sense of shared values they can actually feel. And a lot of the time, without this connection, and when this connection piece isn't thought about, they can often feel like a bit of a cog in a wider system and not a person. And again, that can lead to disengaging and potentially even feeling like, you don't have a place in the organization. Oh no, we're having another problem. I can see Charlotte saying the slides haven't moved on for you. IT is not liking very much today. Let me briefly try sharing and resharing.
It's the heat, Shoshana. It's
I
obviously
know.
having an impact.
It literally says my screen sharing is paused, so I'm just gonna try and reshare again. How about this?
It says you started screen sharing, but I can't see anything. No.
Okay. How about... Thank you, Charlotte, for letting me know. These things never go smoothly. Okay. How about, can we see something now?
We can see your three circles with your three
Okay,
C's.
perfect. So this is the three C's I'm talking about.
Okay, lovely. I'll keep an eye on it. And if it doesn't move on for your next one, I'll jump back on again.
Okay, perfect. So just for context, I've gone through this kind of clarity piece. We're then talking about this connection piece. And then next is challenge, right? So this is another thing that's important to keep in mind. They are super ambitious and they're growth driven, but not necessarily always in that kind of corporate climbing way and wanting to get to the highest level. But the things they do really want are, those stretch opportunities, that feedback that helps them grow, and that kind of real permission to try, fail, and improve. And a lot of the time, without that challenge, they can actually check out and they can make that assumption that, the company isn't really investing in them. So that is my kind of three C's framework of things you definitely need to keep in mind when thinking about your onboarding and also thinking about your wider development programs. Question for the audience. Which of these three C's do you currently think your program is strongest in? Would you say clarity, connection, or challenge? I'll give you a second to think about that and drop your thoughts in the chat box. Connection. I was expecting everybody to say that. Yeah, lots of organizations do a really, really good job at that connection piece, at least connection between cohorts. Sometimes not so much on the kind of manager piece. And then often that's missing is that kind of clarity piece around what is expected of them and also that challenge piece. So let's maybe talk about this topic a little bit further. So, a lot of the time, when engagement drops, we sometimes can tend to potentially blame that on, I would say, potentially surface like symptoms. So, potentially things like, the grads and apprentices on our team are disengaged, managers aren't reinforcing, they're forgetting what they've learned, things like that. But a lot of the time, or sometimes, the real issue is the system around them, essentially. So, a lot of the time, we have actually built structures that do lack that context, that connection, that challenge, and also that reinforcement. So sometimes it's no wonder that the learning we're giving them doesn't stick. And it's not necessarily that the young people we're working with can't engage, it's that we're sometimes asking them to play a game with no clear rules, no story, and no reward, essentially. So if you have seen some of these issues in your program or challenges, or maybe you've heard yourself or someone else on your team saying some of these things, it's not because your early talent aren't trying. It can just be, it could potentially be because maybe the structure you have right now isn't necessarily the best one to be keeping them engaged over time. So now let's talk a little bit about gamification. So gamification is not about turning work into a game, at least not from my perspective at least. It's about turning learning into a journey. And this quote is from, and I'm really praying I'm not going to butcher his name, but from an individual called Yu Kai Chu. And he is one of the leading thinkers in gamification design. He's worked with amazing companies like Google and Tesla to design systems that keep people motivated and not with just gimmicky games, but with actual real purpose and progression. So when we talk about gamification for graduates and apprentices, I'm not suggesting we start turning their jobs or their training into Mario Kart. As amazing as that would be, and as much as I do love Nintendo and Mario Kart, I'm talking about creating a journey with milestones, missions, small wins, and feedback that will give them structure and motivation to keep going. The only thing I can describe it as is think of Duolingo or think of Couch to 5K. These are all games and apps that work really well because they help people feel progress. And I really believe that's what early talent needs, not necessarily another 2, 3 hour PowerPoint presentation that they're sitting down and just watching. So, now let's talk about your game plan. So here I've essentially developed a structure that any of you should be able to use to kind of keep in mind when you are thinking about these onboarding and development structures. So this is actually your game plan. And I just want to kind of walk you through the four sections of this framework, essentially. So G stands for goal-based progression. So this helps talent see progress and helps them stay engaged. So an example of maybe what something like this could potentially look like, and I'm going to go into some examples in the next slide as well, could be something like a live skills passport. showing them the different skills that they have unlocked or they can unlock through their journey. So, for example, in week two, we're going to do this session, and then you're going to then go and run your first internal meeting. And coming in week five, you'll be learning this and something interactive, whether that's digitally, and things like this can be done really simply on different Teams applications or the likes of Notion to create something like a little bit of a skills passport or a skills tracker so that they can actually see in real time their progression. And it's adding that little bit of a gamified element into it. This part of the framework is actually supported by some interesting data I was looking into by Handshake, who actually said that 83% of Gen Z do want that clear career roadmap. So this not only supports that piece, but it also links to the clarity piece of the three C's I spoke about previously. The next piece is active participation. So this is essentially allowing them to learn via doing. So that can be doing things like using decision-making scenarios, even really super simple things like using polls or using reflections. And you can do these in a low-tech way. One example that I quite like is kind of they're called present it back moments. So maybe after they've been taught about how to learn a particular tool or system, can you ask them to create a 2-minute video where they actually explain that concept back to maybe another confused graduate or apprentice? Activities like this are really actually going to help them not only, you know, understand the skill and tool they've learned, but they're also practicing that by talking about it and explaining it to someone else to show that they really actually understand the learning. And this is supported by data as well. So people actually retain 75% of what they do compared to 10% of what they read, according to national training labs. The third part of this is meaningful context. So this ties every learning to real work, essentially. So one example of what this could look like could be potentially problem-focused onboarding or a problem-focused activity with onboarding. So kicking off either week two or week three, once they've kind of got to the grips of something, of asking them, what's one process that has confused you so far? What's one process that has confused you so far? Now I want you to go and redesign that process for next year's cohort. So again, that is them going to be tying in some of their learnings, for example, if they would have learned problem solving, into a meaningful context in a really easy, low cost, no tech really need way. And again, when you're doing this, this is going to make them contribute faster. It's going to make the content stick, especially when they're involved in actually building a system which can potentially help future cohorts and future graduates and apprentices rather than just learning a particular skill. And of course, again, backed up by data, typically contextualized learning is twice as likely to be applied on the job. And finally, emotional connection. So I know based on the chat, everyone in here feels like they do a great job at this already. So you may already be doing things like this. But of course, that emotional connection piece is really there to help them feel seen, heard, and supported, and ultimately connecting to something bigger, which ties back to the three C's I shared at before. So this can be a whole bunch of things. It can be for example, as part of your onboarding and as part of your program, you host a session at different points throughout the year. I don't know, it could be titled something like, things I wish I'd known, and Ask Me Anything with graduates maybe 2-3 years ahead, which I'm sure a lot of you do these type of things. But a lot of the time, it's not always focused on those emotional truths. Sometimes it can be very focused on that kind of surface level advice as opposed to the emotional truth piece. Another example could even be something just as really simple as asking them to write a future letter to themselves. And maybe on the very day one, they can write something along the lines of, what do I want to achieve in the next 6 months? And then they can revisit that 6 months down the line at either their probation check-in or even later at their program graduation ceremony. And again, that's going to help with that emotional connection. And when your game plan and your programs are keeping these things in mind, these are the type of things that are going to keep them engaged. Quick question for everyone, similar to the last question, but which of these would you say you already actively have in your kind of training programs or your onboarding, if any? We've got Sim, active participation, meaningful context. Nice. We've got Claire, active participation. Active participation, meaningful context, and emotional connection. Nice, Emma. Okay, so potentially for some of you, integrating that goal-based progression would probably be super helpful. Okay, nice. We've got Tracy, active participation and emotional connection. And I notice also potentially, I think for some of you, that meaningful context, so maybe opportunities to actually practice and repeat what they've learned as opposed to just kind of passively listening. Cool. Okay, perfect. So let's move on. 1 second. Oh, I've just gone 2 slides ahead. Okay, so now let's start talking again about maybe how we could potentially put some of these things into practice. So like I said before, you don't necessarily need fancy software or a big budget to gamify your onboarding or to gamify your development programs. I would say if you are looking to, start small and start simple, you do just need these 3 things. So here I've basically put together 3 principles and 3 example strategies to hopefully help you understand and hopefully help you think of how you could maybe implement this from your own standpoint. The first one is progression. So this is something that's going to kind of help them understand and help them feel like, they are kind of really moving forward. So similar to kind of the challenge-based learning we just spoke about last time, an example of progression or how you could integrate something like that could be mission-based onboarding. So you could even do something as simple as breaking out their first 30 days into missions with real outcomes and a light structure. So that could literally just be something as simple as the way you structure their first 30 days or the way you structure their 2 weeks onboarding, or even the names you call different sessions or the focus names you have for each week. So for example, here I've got week 1 would be the Explorer week where you learn the culture. You then participate in that. You then unlock week 2, which is you're now the contributor where you're actually testing out key tools. You then have week 3 where you're the collaborator and you have another task that you can achieve. And then week 4, you are the communicator and you have another task that you can complete. And then, of course, when they complete that, they're then on to another mission or another challenge or another level. So that's just an example of potentially a really simple thing that could be done. The next one is participation. So again, that is having a look at, are they actually actively involved in the learning as opposed to maybe just passively listening to it. So an example of this could be something like real world challenges. So where you can use potentially everyday tasks as mini missions to apply learning in real time. So for example, after they attend something like a CRM training or a software training, I gave this example already, but record a 60-second pitch as if you're explaining that to someone else. And then they can review that in pairs and give feedback to each other. And again, that's going to further integrate and emphasize that learning in their head so that they're less likely to forget, but also they're engaged because they're doing something active that they're going to enjoy. And the third one is positive reinforcement. So are they getting feedback and recognition? Because again, this is kind of definitely very important for engagement. So this third one and what this could potentially look like, there are lots of different ways of doing this, but just to give you an example, and again, a really simple one you can all do, because I'm sure you maybe already all will have when your new cohorts join a Teams channel or a Slack channel or something like that. You could literally just set some time aside and be like, okay, every Friday at 10 a.m., I'm going to give them a weekly prompt where they can reflect. So you could even just pop in like, everyone, what's one thing you've learned the hard way this week? What did you now know that you did on day 1? And then the kind of best responses could be highlighted in something wider externally, whether that be a newsletter or whether that be an internal roundup. And again, that way they're going to be reflecting on their experiences, but they're also going to be getting that positive reinforcement when the best or most interesting 1 or 2 responses are being spotlighted further. So, question for the chat. I'm curious if you could maybe tweak one part of your program or onboarding next week, maybe thinking on these kind of progression, participation, or positive reinforcement. What do you think you could potentially have as maybe a quick win or a quick tweak that you could do to integrate one of these? And whilst I grab a drink and refresh myself as I'm sweating away, I'll let everyone have a think. Okay, so we've got Tracy, mission-based onboarding would greatly improve our program. Absolutely. We've got Emma, positive reinforcement. We have a Teams channel, but I like the idea of reflections. Yeah, the Teams one is so easy because a lot of the time we all have Teams channels, but normally they don't really get used. They're just to upload documents or to ask a question if someone has. But I think just actively using them and popping in prompts once a week can really help with that kind of community and emotional aspect side as well. And we have Jackie as well, the weekly prompts, and we have Claire, positive reinforcement, set up a Teams channel. Love that. Cool. So now let's move on. Oh, why does this? Perfect. So now let's talk a little bit about different touch points, oh, potentially throughout the journey. And I'm hoping this isn't going to be cut out. Let me just zoom out. I'm hoping everyone can see all of this slide. If not, please just bear with me. Clearly, IT is just not on my side today. Doesn't want it to happen for me. So let's quickly talk about potentially what this could look like at different touch points throughout the journey, right? Because we've spoken a little bit about onboarding, but there are actually different ways that we could integrate some of these gamification pieces throughout actually the whole early careers development journey. So obviously pre-boarding, typically this is done in various different ways throughout different organizations. But really, what we want to do there is we want to feel like making that first wait and the waiting before they're joining. We kind of want that to feel a little bit like progress rather than silence. So some ideas of things we could potentially do with pre-boarding are things like unlocking like insider info emails which have kind of mini quizzes or different pieces of information, because I know actually one challenge lots of early careers teams have is our apprentices don't check their emails, but can you gamify in it a way where you're actually giving out different pieces of information that's kind of being drip fed at different points. And you can maybe use another channel, which they do use, like WhatsApp. Actually, if you check your emails, you're going to be unlocking some insider information. It's going to give you some insight on actually who's going to be on your team or what you're going to be doing. Could also even do something fun like a kind of meet your cohort bingo. So creating a little bingo card of things they could do and questions they could maybe ask other people within their cohort before they join. That could be something a little bit fun to do and a little bit keeping them engaged. Or even just something like a digital checklist that allows them to tick off their onboarding prep. So normally there's going to be various different admin type things I'm sure they need to do before they actually join, whether that be signing a contract or submitting their personal information or bank details or whatever. If there's any way we can kind of digitize that or gamify that, so as they tick those little checklists off, it's going to say, okay, you're 80% ready to start, you're 80% ready to launch, those type of things. Again, as humans, ticking off those things and earning those little percentages, that gives us a dopamine hit, and everyone is going to love that. So those are just a few ideas to kind of keep energy high before they even walk through the door, and to let them know that, you know what, we haven't forgotten about you. We're actually really excited for you to join. Onboarding, we've spoken a little bit about, so I'm not going to go into that one too much. I'm going to maybe move on. We've spoken about the kind of mission map, so each week unlocking a new skill or challenge. We could also do something like awarding badges, so awarding badges to people that give support and don't just complete tasks. And we've also spoken about learning prompts. So let's maybe move on to post onboarding, right? So maybe when they're in the kind of first 1 to 6 months. So sometimes, or a lot of the time, this is where some of that uncertainty can kind of really creep in, because onboarding has happened. Now they're actually within their roles. So again, could we look at things like some kind of self-paced development quests? So within your first month, one of your tasks to do is to complete your first solo task or to run a meeting or to handle feedback. And again, that is kind of something they can tick off and potentially earn points for or complete a progress bar for. And of course, they'll all be doing these things, but I think different people will achieve these things at different times. Through a lot of the work I'm doing, I'll maybe go in and deliver a gamified learning experience on communication or presentation, and half the room would have given a presentation, and half the room would have never have given a presentation. So even just having that kind of self-paced development checks and assigning maybe weeks and months to them, that's going to make sure everyone is on a kind of more aligned learning journey potentially. Could also have something like a growth board, so you can use different tools for that, like a Notion, or there's also different Microsoft tools to for them to kind of track the different skills they've developed. And then also potentially things like the reflections again, end of month reflection challenges. Um, so yeah, typically when they are in that kind of 1 to 6 months, that is sometimes where drop off and disengagement happens. So the gamification element is going to help give them that visibility and growth when they need it most. And then finally, the kind of retention and recognition piece. So maybe that kind of 6+ months to a year onwards. A lot of the time it's like, okay, how can we keep that momentum alive? So I guess some ideas for that could potentially be, you know, graduates or apprentices, eventually they can maybe unlock a mentor status, which means they'll be able to eventually, when new cohorts start or when they're in their first year, they can then technically be a mentor to another graduate or apprentice. I know lots of organizations do have mentor and buddy schemes, but a lot of the time, those are maybe more experienced individuals or someone that's already completed the program, right? But why can't it be someone that's already on the program? And allowing them that opportunity can then help unlock something exciting for them, which is going to keep them engaged. Things like first year awards, which are voted by peers, which I know lots of people do anyway. And then finally, a cool one that I'm kind of seeing right now is a kind of design your own development path. So maybe potentially giving them the option to, once they've completed the kind of mandatory learning and development piece, can they actually have a say in choosing from which learning tracks interest them? Because I think, again, just to summarize, that onboard and that retention piece doesn't come from lots of flashy things. Actually, a lot of the time it comes down to some of those bare basics, which come through that sustained purpose, visibility, and feelings of kind of community and belonging. Okay, now, oh, I've zoomed through this quickly. So I'm actually nearly at the end. I feel like I've zoomed through this. So I guess just to give you an example of what happens when we apply some of these ideas. Just some examples of two quick, simple pieces of work I've worked on. So one of these examples is some work I did with M&S, and this actually wasn't this example wasn't directly with their early career talent. This was actually with their managers. So I worked with them to design an interactive learning experience for line managers to help them understand how to engage and support their graduates and apprentices better. And when we integrated some of these concepts that I've gone through here, we were able to get some great results, a 66% increase in confidence when we integrated some of those concepts I've spoken about. And then on the right hand side is another example with Carla. This was with their early career talent. And I collaborated with them to integrate some of these concepts into their existing program, into some of their existing training. And we were able to increase confidence around skills like resilience, problem solving, and time management from just under 70% to 100%, which is amazing. So when these concepts are applied, they can really, really make a difference. Oh, I've just got a chat coming through. Perfect. And then I guess just to finish 1 second, and then if we have any questions, we'll absolutely make time for them. Oh, my screens are going. So yeah, I'm currently partnering and chatting with a small number of early career talent teams to deliver gamified learning experiences for grads and apprentices, or to help them design and embed some of these elements I've spoken about into their existing programs. So if any of the things I've gone through sparked an idea or even just a what if, I'd love to explore that with you. So you can either add me on LinkedIn, or you can potentially book a call with me to learn more. And yes, I guess one question for you all before we move on to the Q&A would be, what is one idea you are potentially either taking or stealing from today's session? Because I'm totally open. Steal any of my ideas. I'm happy for you to do that. Which one idea were you maybe taking away or potentially stealing? And I'll give you a second to think about that in the chat. Emma, we've got the reflection piece in our Teams channel, which we already have, but could use better for sure. Absolutely. I love that, Emma. Charlotte said, I love how the language you use really gamifies activities that we already do, but makes them more engaging and less must-do lists. Thank you, Charlotte. I'm glad you think so. We've got Paul Roberts, team engagement, quick and easy to implement. Thanks. You're welcome, Paul. And let's see if anything else is coming in. We've got Simone. I really like the learning prompts channel. We also get our students to do coursey presentations. I like the what did you learn the hard way, encourages them to be vulnerable and think about what they've learned from potential mistakes. Love that. We got Mark, personal growth tracker. Nice. Okay, so we've got some really good examples coming in, and we got Jackie, all really useful ideas to implement into our work experience development program, team channel, and the peer voted awards. Thank you. You are very welcome. And Claire, cohort engagement through teams and the 3Ps. Love that. Perfect. Well, yes, you'll all have access to these slides. So if you can't remember what the 3Ps were or the 3Cs, you'll be able to review them. So yeah, now I guess is the time for questions if anyone has any, but also equally we've had quite a lot of good conversations through the chat already.
We
So
have
I'm happy with
indeed,
that.
yeah. Yes, if you have a question, then obviously do. That was really interesting. Thanks, Shoshana. I mean, there's a couple of things for me. When you were discussing the 3Cs at the beginning, that initial leap between if these things aren't happening, then those individuals may feel that the company is not actually investing in them. Because I don't think they see, we know from our stats the amount of money it takes to recruit an apprentice or a graduate. It's in the recruitment survey, which we'll be going live with very soon. Keep your eyes open for that. But it costs a lot of money. But of course, they don't see that. They don't see the time that goes into it. They see there's a job application and an assessment selection process. So the fact that they may make that leap and go, oh, actually, that investment's not happening once you get past that onboarding thing, I think is a really good thing to be able to take away for everybody. And there's some as people have said, some really quick and easy things that could be implemented. I guess, the challenge, and I'm sure this is where you get working with people, is turning that into a whole piece rather than just dropping in some little things here and there. But I agree with whoever it was said, the language we're using, that sort of gamification language, is probably really, really helpful for this audience. So lots to be done. And the other thing towards the end that you said, which just shows my age, was about choosing their own development path. That reminds, when I was growing up, we used to have choose your adventure books that I would get from the library, and you'd get to page 7 and you'd have two options, and you'd either go to page 12 or page 25, and then you'd work your way through, and you feel like it's such a personalized experience, even though I would go back and make different choices second time around and third time around, because I was that kind of girl. But it is that sense of, well, I've got something that's special for me, and I've got some control over the decisions that I'm making. So that was 40 years ago or something, but that mentality, that sort of ownership, is still very much alive with this generation. I know we talk about differences in generations. Some of it is just human behavior, right?
Yeah, we all have way more similarities than we think.
Lovely way to put it. Yes, Simone will absolutely share the slides, and Wale will do that for us. Haven't had any questions come in, so I think that means everybody's got the information they need,
I
Shoshana.
did my job here. Love that.
You did. So thank you to all for the engagement on the chat. Very much appreciated. Thank you for joining us. Hope you can go somewhere a bit more cooler now, Shoshana, and get a little rest outside of the loft. That'd be great. And hopefully we will see some of you at the recruitment conference next week, or at an ISE event soon. Have a lovely rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.